Today on The State of Us, as baby boomers retire, developers bet urban senior living will take off. What will that mean for the young? Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by the one and only, the friendly, redneck liberal, senior resident historian, extraordinaire, and educator of more than 35 years, the one and only, whose title takes a long time to say, Mr. Lance L. Jackson. And a baby boomer himself, how fitting a topic, as we'll discuss today, not only the housing crisis rocking America, but specifically as baby boomers are looking to move into this latter stage of elderly age. What are they after in housing? It might not be what we've come to think of in the way of senior living. And not just what are they looking for, but how is what they are looking for going to affect what young people have access to? But before we dive headfirst into this topic, Lance, what is the word of the day?
Ebullient. E-B-U-L-L-I-E-N-T, 3 syllables. Meanings overflowing with enthusiasm, high spirits, exuberant. Ebullient. And Justin is way too ebullient today. I'm going to try to reach his level of ebulliency.
Ebulliency? Mm-hmm. Also similar to the word exuberant or buoyant, cheerful, joyful, cheery. Merry, sunny, a sunny disposition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna try to reach
ebullient.
I'm gonna try to reach your level of ebullience. That's what I'm gonna try to do. Because I'm pretty crotchety this morning.
Oh,
that was my other choice of words, and I thought we were gonna have a happier show than that. So calling me a baby boomer when I'm not.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just going. The article says you're born 1946 through 1964. Oh, does not go back far enough for you? Is that the trouble?
Yeah, that's the problem.
Oh,
there.
okay. 1946. So anyway, you're looking at maybe changing your living situation, right? So hopefully this hits home. I mean, there's been...
Yeah, I'm going to be homeless on a beach.
Oh, okay. Is it a nude beach?
I don't care. It's fine with me.
Okay. Whatever beach will take you.
That would be just somewhere, just no possessions, nothing to mow, no roof to fix, no washer going bad, just laying there and letting the water lap up, and if the ocean takes me out, then
see ya.
That would be my definition of ebullient.
Okay,
I would be excited about that.
I'd give that about 2 or 3 days before you went crazy.
But no, I mean, you play around with things. You've got this big home that you've built and added onto and kept nice to raise a family, and then they come back 2 or 3 times a year, and it's like, why are we sitting here in this big old house with these acres to take care of and to landscape? And, you want to travel. So wouldn't it be easier to downsize? But then, what do you get rid of? And, where do you go? I mean, do you go where all the other old people are going? Or do you want to stay around young people? And, what kind of lifestyle do you want to have? And, yeah, it's a harder decision than I ever thought it would be. What do you want? Where do you want it? And what do you want out of it? I mean, those are some big questions. And all the time I've got people on a weekly basis, millennials basically, asking me, are you ready to sell? Because I live in a good school district, and it is a nice lot, and it is, it has a livable house on it, but it has a lot next to it that you could build on. I'm being made offers on a weekly basis, but it's like, okay, I can take that money, and it's good money for what I paid for my house, but what am I going to put it back into? And rents are atrocious. So it's like, okay, I don't want to own anymore, but how long will what I sell my house for last in rent?
Yeah.
It's not really free money because I'm going to have to go live somewhere. That's why I opened with, I'm just going to go live on a beach somewhere, be homeless, because then I'd have money. But the money I'm going to make on my house, I'm going to have to turn it into something else, and it's going to spend even more money. And yours truly isn't like the boomers in these articles who wants to be in debt. I'm enjoying the fact that I'm almost out of debt. I know you have that lovely saying of, well, we always owe somebody something. But in my mind, my vehicles are paid for, my home's paid for, and my wife is retiring. So
in the conventional sense, you'll be...
This is what I've always...
owed free.
Right. This is what I've always worked for and thought would be the epiphany, the apex, of life that I would...
And then you'll be in an ebullient mood on that day.
Well, but the problem is I'm not. This is what I was working to achieve, and I've achieved it. And now it's like, yeah, what else is there?
Well, I think that's part of what this article is touching on, right?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I could see myself in many of these people, except for the $4 million apartments they're buying in New York City. I'm like, not me.
I don't see that part.
Yeah, I can't do that.
But a lot of the themes that they're talking about are as people are living longer, right? And a lot of people are staying healthier relative to what people would have been at the same age than they used to be. So the question is, well, I could still go do more things. So where do I want to live? What do I want to have to take care of, right? And I think that is part of, as you've reflected, you have this property, which isn't unlike other people your age in terms of owning larger homes, larger pieces of land. What do I really need this? Do I really want? Not just need, do I really want this? Because if I don't go to 3 of the rooms on a weekly basis, what am I doing with it? And do I spend time keeping up with something that's not really bringing me great joy to keep up with? I'm just doing it because it has to be kept up with.
Right. I mean, you run into things that you want to do other things. And it's like, well, your energy starts to wane. We were talking about this. I'm used to working 60, 70 hours a week. And now I'm down to where I've got about 40 to 50 good hours in me. And what do I want to do with those hours? I can't keep going at that pace that I used to want to work. And so now you revise what it is that is important to you and fit it into the hours that you can do something, and I don't see that necessarily going up, I think, most people, if you can work 40 hours a week, you're doing pretty well. Well, I'm used to doing more than that, but I'm having trouble doing that. And so now what do I want to do with my time? And then, like the article says, people did that, right? They played golf 4 days a week, or they played tennis, or they traveled. And now they're in their early 70s and they're still healthy. And it's like, well, I've done that. Now what do I want to do with my time? You have these, your bucket list of things you want to do when you're retiring. And okay, now you do that. Now what do you do? And that's your point of people are living longer in a healthier environment, and so now they're faced with, well, in my late 60s, early 70s, now where do I want to live? Now what do I want to do? Because I've done the retirement stuff, but I'm still alive and I'm still kicking, and I've still got some, there's an elderly lady. I say elderly, she's in her mid 70s. She had a big, huge home down in South Carolina, retirement home that she built. And now they have a condo in Boston. And she said, if we want to eat Italian, we jump on the train and we go to the North End. And if it's going to be a snowstorm, then I can order whatever I want from Uber Eats. And I'm 10 minutes from the airport and I can fly anywhere I want to go. So, it's like, well, not a bad life, right? If you can get it. But that was after, we built our retirement home in South Carolina and we played golf and, pickleball and everything else for 15 years. And it's like, well, that was fun, but we don't want to do that anymore. So it's almost like stages of retirement, right? I mean, people have done so well. It's almost like there are stages of retirement.
Yeah. Well, and I think that speaks to that whole idea of living longer. And what we've talked about is this may be not the living longer bit, but the stages of retirement may be a sort of one-off kind of thing, or at least for the foreseeable future it might be, because baby boomers may be, one of the few generations that have this interesting sort of extended retirement period. Not something that many of them were probably counting on necessarily either, but nevertheless, it's here. And, it's going to span many decades. So it's a question of how are you going to deal with, if you're retiring at 55 to 65 and you have 20, 30, maybe longer left, you're probably not going to be content if you're in decent health to just idle by and only ever play golf. I mean, it's easy to say that that's what you want to do. And I think what the article points out is people are confronted with that. It's fun for a while, but they're looking to do different things. And I think that speaks to the staging that you had mentioned as far as, we might do this for a little while, then we're going to do something else. And the question about, well, what does that mean for housing? Because I think back to, and we'll let people chew on this, I got to live in downtown Cincinnati for a while. I think there was a lot of, benefits to that. For example, I mean, I was not responsible if things broke in my apartment. I just call the maintenance person of the apartment and say, hey, this thing needs fixed, and they come fix it. There's no bill. I don't have to schedule nobody. It just, it just happens.
Right.
It's just taken care of. It's done. They're not my appliances, I mean,
you don't have to replace them.
You don't have to replace them. And you don't have to do that thing that you talked to me about when the washer broke down of, if I buy another one, do I spend good money on it? Or because I'm not going to necessarily be around to use it that long. Like,
right.
You don't have to worry about any of that because it's like, nah, it does not matter, right? It does not matter to me because these things I don't have to worry about. And the entertainment component, I think, is big. The life component of what that enables, because as you mentioned, you might still be in that phase where you want to be very active and you want to go do things like this lady that's, I could fly to these places. I could go eat. I have, within my reach on any given day, I could eat at any type of restaurant I want.
But am I road blocking millennials by staying in my house? I mean, I think that's the other piece that we want to talk about is, do we want to see people, developers build these places for senior citizens to open up these family homes that people like me are living in for millennials who are having a family who want that, who need those who need those rooms, who need these houses and want these lawns where they can set up fire pits and swing sets and, set up the trampoline and the play place for their children and have parties and people over, because I'm past that stage. But if I stay in my house, I'm keeping some millennial from wanting to take that next step from that apartment in Cincinnati to move out into the country and a good school district with multiple bedrooms and multiple space to expand. So does building these places open things up for the next generation by enticing me and my wife to go live somewhere else? I think that's a big question, right? Because something's got to get out there that's going to want me to give up what I've already paid off.
So let's talk about home ownership and how this trend of moving to urban living may impact younger generations. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. When we think about where old people, the elderly, are going to be living, the seniors, I think it's also important to note, as we've talked about, that we see more that are interested in not just being retired, right? There are those that want to volunteer. There are those that want to work. Now, they may not want to do any of that full time, but they're looking to find things that add purpose to their life, not just fun. And I think part of that realization is that part of what makes fun is there has to be something to contrast that with. There has to be something that you're rewarding yourself for. And if it all just becomes reward, then really nothing is a reward. And so things lose their value, and I think that's part of what we're seeing in this trend is, these people are deciding, look, I may not need this house, right? But I want to be in a place where I can see and interact with young people, where I can go do things, where I can still be part of society. I don't want to be relegated to some community on the outskirt of town that nobody ever goes by and, is sleepy and tired. Well, we have a housing problem in the United States. Lance and I have been covering this for years. It is only a problem that has accelerated. We need more housing than we have of all types. And what are we doing about that? How does this impact that? Well, On the one hand, them moving into cities, right, is going to free up the houses that they once occupied, which then could possibly be purchased by those looking to own a home. Because according to Forbes, when it comes to home ownership, the most populous generation, that is the millennials, is also the one that trails older generations, with some 47.9% owning homes in 2020 versus Gen X home ownership enjoying a rate of 69% and baby boomers 77.8%. So, and that's according to the Census Bureau. In fact, home ownership has been on a diminishing path with each successive generation. Part of that, yes, is a change in how people are opting to live. It's also, though, an availability and affordability component that we've talked about as well. Housing prices are on the rise. Wages, relatively speaking, to some of those previous generations are lower. So the opportunity to buy a home is more challenging. It's also important to recall that millennials, a lot of them were coming into their careers and of age during the Great Recession, in which case it made it even more tricky because that financial and the housing market were on shaky footing at best. This is an area where potentially this could help. At the same time, the other possibility there, Lance, that I see is, well, there's a lot of millennials that want the apartments. By prioritizing the wealthy old people apartments, are you now squeezing out the thing that millennials actually can afford, which are apartments?
Well, what you need is, like you said, we need multiple types of housing. And I think to concentrate on one area is probably a mistake. But again, people with money who are looking to make money are going to build what will make them the most money. And therein lies the rub. But to get someone out of, the suburbs, depending on where young people want to live, and we've talked about this, it's tied to jobs. Like my home is in, a farm community. It's not even in a community, right? It's just on a road, out in farm country in a good rural school district. But who's going to want to live there, right? Who's going to be attracted to come live in the Midwest in a small town with one grocery store, and a Walmart? How many young people are looking to live that lifestyle? So does it do any good to get me out of my home? You know what I'm saying? I mean, is that even worthwhile? But I don't know what you do, because I think we've seen the demographic trend in the United States go towards the coast and go towards the cities. And there's just not enough space. I say that. I mean, we can live like people do in Hong Kong and Japan and other places and just keep building higher and higher, right? And jam more people per square mile. Because there are countries that's the way people live. That wasn't what I wanted growing up. Is that what millennials want now? Do they want to own a condo, or do they want to own a house with some land to take care of and that they can develop and landscape and do the things they want to do? What is it that millennials are looking for?
Well, I think part of what the Forbes article
do they know?
Highlights is it is a mixed bag. A lot of millennials currently reside in cities of at least 500,000 people, 6 out of 10. Or in suburban towns that are close to big cities. But depending on different life stage priorities, there were some key differences. The various ages and stages of millennials who live in or near cities are there for different reasons. Couples and males are more likely to live in big cities, while single females tend to live in smaller cities or towns. But across all segments, 7 out of 10 millennials who live in big cities or their suburbs across all ages and categories say that their living situation is hard or extremely hard to afford. No matter where they lived, more than half of them, 56%, found their area hard to afford. Among those millennials we surveyed, the ability to make the leap to home ownership is a problem for the vast majority. 73% of the respondents who don't own property are making the lifestyle choice to rent.
You see, that fits my two millennials. All right. That's what I hear from them. Rent is, it's twice my mortgage. Okay. But yet they don't have the money or the down payment, even though they're both college educated. They're not making the money to be able to afford what home ownership costs in the areas where they live. And so they're caught between a rock and a hard place. They're paying very high rent for places in decent neighborhoods, but it doesn't allow them to build up any equity, and they don't have the money available to put a down payment on a house because the houses in those areas are skyrocketing in cost.
Yeah.
So are they choosing to rent? They're almost being forced to choose to rent because wages haven't kept up with the cost of homes.
So they did this big survey, Forbes did, of all these millennials, to find different things out. And they had an open comment section, and they said that one wrote, quote, "We feel cheated because no matter how hard we work and save, we can never get ahead. We're always 3 steps behind. This American dream is seeming more like a myth." End quote. Nearly half of all the people that Forbes talked to described that they are unhappy in their current living location. More than a third, 37% of respondents, especially those living in dense metropolitan areas, told us they would move to a smaller town because it would be more affordable. Among the youngest millennials, those that are now 25 to 30 years old, the lure of job opportunities is what drew them to big cities. But with wages stagnating, even as median cost of a home continues to rise dramatically, 23.4% year over year, according to the National Association of Realtors looking at June 2021 data, the city is a potentially false lure if their eventual goal is financial stability and home ownership. Part of obviously what the article contends, which we've talked about before, is that for many past generations and even for the current generation, owning a home, and the sooner you own it, is a cornerstone of building lasting wealth. And the fact that so many millennials, over half of millennials, do not currently own property is a problematic issue for the generation, since we have built an economy and a system that are designed around that. And we also know that millennials are much more socially minded than past generations in terms of their eagerness to do things that they feel are good for society. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think as we look at what can baby boomers do as they retire and what will that enable for the youth, I think there's interesting opportunities there as the baby boomers, such as Lance, maybe look to move out of their big old farmhouse, let somebody else younger move into it. What happens for small towns because of that, and what gain does that provide to cities? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Lance, the baby boomer that refuses to be a baby boomer. Would you say that your mood has become more ebullient as the show has gone on, or are we still cantankerous?
No, I think I sound pretty ebullient. I'm feeling better.
Ebullition?
I want to try. I'm trying to do what's right. But to your point from the last segment, my wife would like to move closer to our daughters, who live, like 45 minutes apart, when she retires. But when we look to sell our place, it's going to cost us twice what we can sell our farmhouse for a house equal in a neighborhood we want to live up where they live, talking about cost. I can't take the money I'm going to make and I'm going to make money off of my house. I'm going to sell it for more than I've put into it. To your point of developing building wealth. Okay. I'm going to sell it for more than I have in it. But yet I can't turn around and buy something where my wife wants to go live for that price. That would make both of us happy and content. You know what I'm saying? So it's a conundrum, what do I do? We want to leave, but yet the cheapest place we have to live now that the economy is getting tight is to stay put in our home, which probably, as I think about it, isn't the best thing for the growing economy and for everything else. Do I want to be house poor as a retiree? I mean, we've worked all this time so we can travel and go and do what we want.
So maybe you rent per the article, right?
Right. But then you have to factor in, okay, well, according to all the numbers, I've got 18 to 20 years left. So can I live off of selling my house? Can I pay rent for the next 240 months off of what I sell my house for? Plus retirement income.
Plus retirement income. And that's the math I think that people have to do because, you've talked about before. It's obviously very true. You can't take it with you when you go, but you also don't want to, if you have children, hopefully you don't want to be the parent that saddles them if you don't have to. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's unavoidable. So like, I'm not necessarily, passing judgment on people, but obviously I think that there's a lot of parents who would prefer, if it's just up to them and they could do whatever they want, they'd like to leave their family maybe something. But if they're not going to leave them something, they also don't want to leave them with something negative either. Better to be leave them nothing than to leave them a negative.
Exactly.
So I think that, that's a consideration as well. And I guess on the young person front, all I can share is that, from my experience, right, living in a household in a small town, there's only two of us in this household. Neither one of us make what you would call, good money. We make okay money. We own a home though, which we bought in a small town, and I think we both are working in careers that we feel like are benefits to society, which is identified as something that millennials want to do.
But your husband drives 45 minutes one way to work every day.
Correct. Which is still cheaper.
In order to live in to be able to buy a house in this small town.
Yes. And some of that is the desire for certain employers, right? He works in healthcare for those who have listened to the show long enough, you'd know this. But he works in healthcare and he certainly could work 10 minutes up the road, or 20 minutes up the road. But I think the other thing that we find, right, and this is a fairly typical millennial trait, is there's some righteousness to the generation of what they expect from standards of employment and that kind of stuff. And he has chosen, doesn't have to, could work, closer, chooses to work further away to work for an employer that he feels like meets the standards that he expects of the industry, But to your point though, Lance, even that commuting has been identified as...
If you guys tried to buy a house
right
closer to the metropolitan area where he works and split the commute so that you could drive this way and his commute would be the same as yours, you couldn't probably afford a house.
Right.
And not of the style and size that you have if you tried to split the commute in half, because the closer you get to the metropolitan areas where he's chosen to work, the harder it is to find a house that would be affordable for you guys.
And part of the way that you fix the problem is by reducing the demand for that house. One of the reasons obviously the price keeps going up is because everybody thinks that's where they ought to be. And part of what you find is there's a lot of these, quote unquote rural communities that are within a commutable distance to the places that people want to work, where you actually could afford, based on what you already make, to own a home. You probably cannot afford the home in those places. Or if you do, you're stretching yourself so thin that then you feel like it's a struggle to get by all the time. And we don't feel that way. Just in transparency, we don't feel that way, right? Our housing payment is not something that's crushing to us. In fact, we actually pay several $100s more a month than we need to because we can, and that goes back to, we also got lucky that we bought our house before COVID and before housing prices skyrocketed. That there was no way that we knew that was going to happen. Obviously, that's a benefit from a wealth building standpoint, and to not be trying to shop for one now. But it's still true, to your point, that they could get, if that's an option. And I think for most it is. It's a question of if you're looking. And part of what this article highlights is millennials are starting to look at that and say, for a lot of them, they would like to have a house, they would like to do that. They're finding it difficult to do. And I guess the message from my standpoint would be, So you have to broaden the range in which you're willing to look. The more people you cram into a single area, our capitalist economy, supply and demand, the higher the pricing of that housing is going to be. And we're slowing down on how quickly we can build it. So there's an even tighter demand that's being squeezed.
And then money is tight. So now to borrow the money to pay for the house is more expensive than it was just 6 months ago.
Yep. Substantially. I mean, that was the other thing. We were able to lock in a very low rate, on a fixed mortgage.
Except I told you, the first house my parents bought back in the early 70s was at a 7% interest rate, which is, people are complaining it's 4.5 or 5 now. And my parents in 1974 paid, was 7%, was the best loan that they could get on a 30-year fixed mortgage. So yes, it's higher than it has been, but it's not necessarily out of the reach if you, as to your point, expand your look as to where you want to go or are willing to go and still make the drive to work.
And that'll be the question is, are you willing to do that? And I guess the message hopefully would be, give it a try. As long as you're comfortable, doing a 4 or 5 year gamble, even if you end up with a house and you decide you don't want to stay there, as long as you've stayed there 4 or 5 years, there's a pretty good chance that you'll be able to get out of it and you won't lose money. You may not make much, but depending on how the world goes, you also might make a good bit, So I think it's one of those things. It's a hard thing because it's like, I don't feel like I can try that. I'm not sure that millennials can afford not to. We're making decisions as a generation to spend an exorbitant portion of our income on our housing. And a lot of times what we're spending it on is nothing that builds wealth for us. It is simply money that we pay out and is gone, which is the downside, as we've talked to before about apartment-based or any type of rent-based living. I mean, it doesn't have to be an apartment. If you live in a house that you rent, it's the same problem.
But the positive, though, to renting is that you don't have to buy the lawnmower. You don't have to take up time on the weekends to make repairs. You don't have to pay for those repairs.
Right.
You don't have to replace the appliances. You don't have to have a rainy day fund to fix the roof or whatever. That's all done by someone else. So when you buy, you start to give up some of the freedom that you have with your downtime, with your work-life,
Yes.
What do you guys call that?
Work-life balance.
There you go. You guys give some of that up when you buy a house because all of a sudden you have things you have to take care of if you own the place versus if you rent the place. If you rent the place, that makes it easier for your work-life balance.
Right. And the question is how much is that worth? And that's a personal question for people. I mean, it's there's not a hard and fast rule, obviously.
But to those people who live that way, then they're choosing that, and that is worth the building of the equity that you're talking about. They don't want to give up that ability to go and travel and to stay home because they have to fix things up and do things up.
I guess the other point I would make, though, is that if you do choose to purchase, property in a smaller community, the services that you're going to pay for to take care of it are also less. Like this year, I finally moved there's a landscape company that now takes care of stuff because while I wouldn't mind doing that, in my day-to-day life right now, finding the time to do it is a challenge. We can afford, but partly because our housing payment is so low. I mean, right now, if you added what we pay together, for all associated landscaping, the house payment, property taxes, and insurance, we still pay less per month than we paid when we lived in downtown Cincinnati. And that's when we lived in downtown Cincinnati, 5 years ago. If we looked at it today, it'd probably even be greater. But then again, that goes back to the key there is that I'm not trying to do that in a suburb of Cincinnati. I'm doing that in a small town that is, 45 minutes from Dayton and Columbus, Ohio, which, it makes a huge difference. I think people, and that's where I guess the message was, you should look into it, if you're wondering, because you may still be able to do some of those things and be able to afford some of those things that may seem like unnecessary headaches, where you still can also then build the wealth. Not that it's easy to find, but I think that it's out there. And I think that I wish there were more programs, Lance, that helped people find those opportunities.
Right.
Because I think that's part of the problem is finding them can be challenging, especially for young people who are busy working and are busy, starting families and that kind of stuff. And it's like,
and who are new to the process,
right?
Because it is a process. And if you haven't been through it before, it can be very daunting and overwhelming.
Yep. So definitely a lot to look at. Baby boomers moving out of the cities or moving into the cities, millennials possibly moving out, some combination of both. And all of it playing into that, labor shortage, right? We've talked about that. I think the other good thing is if old people are moving into the cities, making way for some of the young people in the homes, the young people are going to be more apt to do the remote work, but the old people might be more apt, if they're staying active, to go to work because they're in a place where there are a wide range of opportunities that they can actually go to. And they're less limited then by their location. And if technology is a concern, if they don't like the remote work part, it's easier for them to get to physical in-person type work as well. So a lot of different
constantly changing and evolution, right? In the workplace and the home. And that's what it's all about, right? That's how you're growing and making a difference. Hopefully things are changing.
Hopefully young and old alike try to keep an ebullient outlook on everything and make sure that, you're looking at the options. I guess that's the biggest thing, is look at the options for both. Don't be constrained to thinking that how it's been done for 20 or 30 years is the way that it should be done for you. Because we are in a very interesting economy right now, a very interesting work situation. And I think it opens the door to new possibilities, not just for young people and not just for old people, but both groups together. So why do we have this conversation today, Lance?
Well, because here at True Chat, we have a mission, and our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And you've had that today between a boomer and millennial over housing and jobs and work and what that all means. And if you liked it and you're telling your office mates or your family about it and they say, well, that sounds like something I'd be interested in listening to, tell them they can find us as a podcast on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is available Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning as a podcast. We're heard on the weekends across the country on AM and FM radio stations. Who's the victor today, Lance, on ebullient?
I think you pulled out a tie there at the end. Again, when Bradley gets done dubbing and editing, I probably lose because that's usually the way it happens.
I gotta love
Bradley likes the millennial. He likes the millennial to win.
That's interesting because Gen Z is kind of spiteful of millennials sometimes.
Yeah, well, but Bradley's a different Gen Zer.
Bradley is not confined by any generation.
No, he is not. He's like me. He'll fight Gen Z like I fight being called a baby boomer.
Will he fight? I don't know if I see Bradley as much of a fighter. Okay.
In his own way, Bradley fights.
Peace, love, and war. Something like that. Okay. For the State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our tremendous audience, for taking time to tune in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.